The metal gate screamed as it slid apart, the sound cutting through the cold Ohio morning like a blade. Evelyn Carter flinched, even though she'd heard it 1,000 times before from the inside. Today it sounded different, final, permanent. She stood just beyond the yellow line, clutching a cardboard box that weighed less than the years it represented. Inside were her prison-issued clothes, a Bible with a cracked spine, a folded letter she'd never sent, and a photograph so worn the faces had almost faded. That was it. 20 years of life reduced to something that could be dropped, crushed, or forgotten. A guard cleared his throat behind her. "You're free to go," he said, not unkindly, not warmly either, just another sentence delivered. Evelyn didn't move at first. Freedom felt unreal, like a word spoken in a foreign language. Her body had learned the rules of confinement too well. Wait for instructions, keep your head down, don't step forward until you're told. The world beyond the gate felt too wide, too loud, too alive. Cars passed on the highway in the distance, their tires hissing against asphalt, a sound she hadn't heard up close since she was 48. She inhaled deeply. The air smelled different out here, less like bleach and iron, more like damp leaves and gasoline and something sharp that reminded her of autumn mornings long ago. Then she took one step. Her knees trembled, not from age alone, but from the memory of the last time she'd walked freely, hands cuffed, cameras flashing, neighbors watching as if she were already a ghost. She remembered the shouts, the accusations, the way her name had been dragged through the dirt before the fire trucks had even cooled. Murderer. Liar. Monster. Those words had followed her into the cell and stayed for 20 years. A prison bus idled nearby, waiting to take her to the nearest terminal. Evelyn shuffled toward it slowly, her cane tapping unevenly against the concrete. Each step felt like crossing invisible lines she'd been forbidden to touch for decades. The driver barely looked at her as he took her ticket, but Evelyn noticed the way his eyes flicked to her hands, as if checking for something dangerous. She chose a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, the prison faded into the distance, tall fences crowned with razor wire, guard towers standing like watchful giants. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the glass, watching it shrink until it looked small enough to fit inside her box. She should have felt joy. Instead, she felt hollow. The road stretched ahead, gray and endless. Trees rushed past, their branches bare, their shadows long. The world had kept moving while she stood still, and now it felt like it was daring her to catch up. She whispered the address under her breath, like a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was still listening to. 214 Maple Street. The words tasted strange. She hadn't said them out loud in 20 years, not since the night everything burned. Her house. The thought made her chest tighten. During her trial, they'd told her the house was gone, sold to cover legal fees, maybe condemned, maybe torn down. The details had blurred together, swallowed by appeals and lockdowns and years that stacked on top of each other like bricks. Eventually, she'd stopped asking. Hope was a dangerous thing inside prison walls. But now she was going back anyway. What would she find? A parking lot, a stranger's mailbox, nothing at all. Evelyn glanced down at the photograph in her box. She didn't need to unfold it to know what it showed. She could see it perfectly in her mind, herself, younger, smiling despite the tired lines around her eyes. Her husband beside her, arms slung over her shoulder. And at their feet, a scruffy, big-eared dog with 2 large paws and a crooked tail. Rusty. Her throat tightened. Dogs weren't allowed in prison photos, but the guards had never noticed the corner of fur peeking into the frame. Or maybe they had and simply didn't care. She closed her eyes as memories flooded in, Rusty racing across the yard, barking at nothing, sleeping curled against the front door like a loyal sentinel. He'd been there the night of the fire. She remembered screaming his name as they dragged her away, the smoke choking her lungs, the heat blistering her skin. Then silence. No one had ever told her what happened to him. The bus slowed as it approached the terminal, jolting Evelyn back to the present. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, older than she felt, thinner than she remembered. Prison had carved deep lines into her face, etched patience and pain into every expression. But her eyes were still sharp, still searching. She stepped off the bus and stood still, overwhelmed by the noise. People hurried past with phones pressed to their ears, coffee cups steaming in their hands, lives unfolding at a pace she no longer understood. No one noticed the old woman with the cardboard box. No one knew what she'd survived. She found another bus, then another. By the time she reached the edge of her old town, the sun was low, bleeding orange across the sky. Familiar streets appeared like half-remembered dreams. The diner on Main Street closed, the grocery store renamed. The church, new paint, same steeple. Her heart hammered harder with every block. Maple Street came into view, lined with aging trees that arched overhead like witnesses who had never left. Evelyn's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the cane as she stepped off the bus for the final time. She stood there for a long moment. The street was quieter than she remembered, too quiet. Then she saw it. 214 Maple Street. The house was still standing. White siding, yellowed with age. The porch sagged slightly on the left, just like it always had. The crooked step was still crooked. The old oak tree still loomed in the front yard, its branches stretching protectively over the roof. Evelyn's vision blurred. It shouldn't have been here, not intact, not waiting. Her feet moved before her mind could catch up, carrying her down the cracked sidewalk toward the front door. Each step felt unreal, like walking into a photograph that had suddenly come to life. The closer she got, the more something felt wrong. The curtains were gone, the mailbox was empty, and the front door. It was slightly open. A chill ran down her spine. No one should have been living there. No one should have been inside at all. Evelyn stopped at the bottom of the porch, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Then she heard it. A sound from inside the house. Low, rough, alive. Not a voice. Not the wind. Something else. Evelyn gripped her cane, fear and disbelief crashing together as the sound moved closer to the door, slow, deliberate, unmistakably real. And whatever was inside was not expecting her to be gone forever. Evelyn's hand shook as she reached for the doorknob. Rust had eaten away some of the metal, and the hinge squealed as she pushed the door open. The smell hit her first: old wood, dust, faint smoke, and something else she couldn't identify, something living. Her heart slammed in her chest. Every nerve in her body screamed to turn and run, but her feet moved forward anyway, climbing the uneven wooden step to the threshold of her home. The living room looked almost frozen in time. Dust coated the corners of the furniture, sunbeams fell across a threadbare rug, and the wallpaper peeled like curling pages of a forgotten book. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of absence, and yet something alive breathed inside, something waiting. Evelyn paused mid-step, scanning the room. The chairs were in the same place, the same coffee table with its chipped corner, the same crooked picture frames, hers and her husband's wedding photo slightly askew. But there was something else, a shadow, low and shifting, near the far wall. It moved closer. Her pulse tripled, her breath shallow. Is it a person, a stranger? But the shadow didn't speak, didn't make a sound except for the low, guttural rumble that rose and fell like a secret melody. She froze, cane digging into the floor, trembling. Then she saw it, a dog. A large, scarred German shepherd emerged from the shadows, its coat dull, matted in places, but its eyes. Evelyn stopped in her tracks. Those eyes, the deep, intelligent, wary eyes, stared straight at her. The dog didn't bark. It didn't wag its tail. It stood like a guardian, tense but unafraid. Her chest tightened. "Rusty," she whispered, the name catching in her throat like a jagged stone. The dog's ears twitched. A low whine escaped its throat, soft and tentative. It limped slightly, one back leg dragging as if it carried a lifetime of pain. Evelyn's hand shot out instinctively. "It's me," she breathed. "Evelyn, it's me, Rusty." The dog tilted its head, and in that moment Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in decades: recognition. Pure, unbroken loyalty. Rusty stepped closer, each movement cautious, deliberate. Then he pressed his massive head against her knee. Evelyn stumbled backward, tears blinding her, collapsing to the floor as the weight of emotion crashed over her. 20 years of wondering, of nightmares and loneliness. And here he was, alive, waiting, somehow. She ran her fingers through his fur, remembering the nights she had cried herself to sleep, imagining him alone, cold, scared, as she rotted behind steel bars. How did you survive?" she asked, voice shaking. The dog's eyes didn't answer, of course, but the look he gave her was more than enough. He had waited. He had survived. He had remembered. Evelyn noticed the frayed leather collar around his neck. No tag, nothing to indicate an owner. She traced her fingers along it, stopping suddenly when she saw a faint mark on his ear, a number tattooed at the base. Her stomach dropped. She remembered the number instantly. It was an animal control tattoo from the shelter she had begged them not to take him from. Rusty had been 2 years old then, scared and stubborn, and she'd kissed the tip of his ear when they handed him over. The tattoo was faded now, nearly illegible, but it was unmistakable. Her knees buckled, tears falling freely. "Rusty, it's really you." Rusty nudged her hand, almost impatiently, then looked toward the hallway behind him. Evelyn followed his gaze and froze again. The hallway was empty, but there were signs someone, or something, had been living here. The dust was disturbed, footprints smudged along the floorboards, faint scratches on the walls, the smell of stale food and wet fur. Someone had been here. Someone had been keeping him alive. Her mind raced. Who? Why? And most importantly, why hadn't they contacted her? She rose unsteadily, her cane digging into the floor for support, and took a cautious step further inside. Rusty limped along beside her, his presence both comforting and unsettling. Evelyn had imagined this reunion countless times, her hand on his head, a warm embrace, tears and relief, but never had she imagined the shadow of mystery that lingered over the house. She moved into the kitchen. Old cupboards rattled as she brushed past. The sink was clean, almost unnaturally so, and a faint aroma of meat lingered in the air. She reached out and touched the counter, and a scrap of paper slid out from under a plate. Heart hammering, she picked it up. It was a receipt, dated yesterday, from the local grocery store. Her eyes widened. Someone had been here yesterday. Rusty growled softly, low and warning. Evelyn followed his gaze to the staircase leading upstairs. The sound of a faint shuffle echoed from above, a door creaking, floorboards sighing under weight. Her heart raced. "Hello," she called, voice wavering. The house didn't answer except for the shuffle above. Rusty's growl deepened. Evelyn's hands trembled. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but something deeper, stronger, rooted her to the spot. Curiosity, fear, hope, something primal that told her that whatever waited upstairs was connected to him, to the house, to her past. She started climbing the stairs slowly, each step a groan in protest. Rusty stayed just behind her, limping, his presence both protective and tense. Her breath came in short bursts, each one tasting of dust and old wood and the memories she thought she had buried. At the top, the hallway stretched before her like a tunnel into the past. Doors stood closed, shadows clinging to each corner. Rusty stopped, head low, staring at the far end of the hall. Evelyn's eyes followed his. And then she saw the door slightly ajar. A light flickered faintly from inside. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run. Every thought screamed at her to prepare for the worst. She turned the knob slowly. The door swung open, and the room was empty. Empty except for the faint scuff marks on the floor, and the smell of something familiar, Cologne, old fabric, a lingering memory. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She glanced at Rusty, his ears perked, his body tensed. Someone or something had been here, had left very recently, and now they were gone. She took a step back, her heart hammering. A whisper of a question escaped her lips. Who was keeping him alive? Rusty's low growl deepened, his gaze fixed on the empty doorway. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. And in that moment, she realized the story of her life was far from over. The house was not abandoned, it was waiting. And whatever or whoever had been inside was watching. Evelyn's knees shook as she sank into the edge of the worn armchair, Rusty pressing against her side, his warm body radiating life she hadn't felt in 20 years. Her hands trembled as she ran them along his fur, each strand roughened by time but alive. Alive. He's alive. She repeated the words in her mind, clinging to them like a lifeline. Her eyes never left him. Every scar, every limping step, every gray strand in his muzzle told a story of survival, resilience, and loyalty. Rusty's gaze never wavered, locked on her with a depth she couldn't explain. It was as if he remembered not just the woman she once was, but the woman the world had tried to erase. She looked around the living room. Dust floated in the sunlight streaming through broken blinds. The furniture was old, worn, but the arrangement remained exactly as she'd left it. The coffee table scarred, the couch cushions sunken, the same crooked painting of her husband hanging above the fireplace. Her breath caught. Memories flooded in, sharper than any she had faced in prison. Nights spent rocking in the chair while Rusty slept at her feet. The sound of his bark when the mailman approached. The way he'd tilt his head when she read aloud to him. The smell of his fur, so distinct, so familiar. Then Rusty moved. He limped forward a few steps and stopped mid-room, muscles coiled like springs. His ears pricked, tail rigid. Evelyn followed his gaze and froze. There, across the room, a shadow shifted near the window. No one should be here. Her heartbeat quickened. 20 years of fear, uncertainty, and loss surged up her spine. Her hands shook as she reached for the edge of the armchair, clinging to it like a lifeline. "Rusty, what is it?" she whispered. Rusty growled low in his throat, a sound she hadn't heard in decades, a sound meant for intruders, threats, and the unknown. The shadow didn't move. It waited, watching. Evelyn's mind raced. Who would have been in her house? No one had visited in 20 years. Not the town, not friends, not family. And yet here was something, or someone, present enough to make Rusty tense like this. She stood slowly, cane in hand, every step deliberate. Rusty followed, limping, keeping a protective circle around her. The dog moved with precision, every instinct alert. Evelyn realized then that Rusty hadn't just survived. He had learned to guard, to protect, to endure alone. Her eyes scanned the living room again. Then she noticed it, a small pile of old newspapers stacked neatly in the corner. On top, a photograph of Rusty as a puppy taken before her arrest. Beneath it, a folded piece of paper. Her pulse spiked. She stepped closer and unfolded it carefully. The note was brief. "He's safe, don't come back yet, you'll know when the time is right." Evelyn's breath caught. Who would leave a note like this? How long had it been there? And why now, after 20 years? Her mind whirled with possibilities, neighbors, friends. Someone who had known the truth about her innocence. The questions collided and her chest tightened with a mix of hope and dread. Rusty whimpered softly, nudging her hand, reminding her she was not alone. Evelyn sank back into the chair, clutching him. She felt the weight of decades pressing down on her. For 20 years she had imagined this moment, returning home, finding Rusty waiting, feeling alive again. And yet, the note and the shadow in the room made her realize the past had not stayed buried. It was still watching, still present. She rose again, resolve hardening. If someone had been here, they might return. She needed answers, and she wouldn't find them by hiding. Rusty limped to the window, nose pressed against the glass, ears swiveling to catch any sound outside. Evelyn followed his gaze. Across the street, an old maple tree swayed in the wind, leaves rustling like whispers, but there was no one, no movement. Still, the sense of being watched lingered. Then she noticed something on the floor, faint scratches near the doorway to the kitchen. They looked recent, fresh enough to catch her eye. Rusty sniffed them, growling again. Evelyn knelt, her hands tracing the lines. They were too precise to be random. Someone had been here. Someone had moved through the house, feeding Rusty, keeping him alive, and then gone. Questions swirled in her mind. Who could it be? Why keep him alive all these years? And most importantly, why now, after all this time, leave a note that would lead her back? Evelyn pressed a hand to Rusty's head, tears falling freely. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I don't understand anything anymore." Rusty leaned into her, as if urging patience, as if telling her that answers would come. His presence was both comforting and unnerving. He was a bridge to her past, a living testament to her lost years. And yet he also carried the weight of mystery. Suddenly a faint sound echoed from the hallway, a soft, deliberate footstep, the kind made by someone who knew the house well. Evelyn froze. Rusty stiffened, growling low, his body a coiled warning. Her heart raced. "Who's there?" she called, voice shaking but firm. No answer. The sound repeated, another step, closer this time. The hairs on her neck stood on end. Evelyn gripped her cane, ready to defend herself, while Rusty positioned himself between her and the hallway. Then she noticed something else, a shadow moving across the far wall. Not human exactly, but large, shape shifting in the flicker of sunlight that came through the blinds. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Her mind flashed back to the night of the fire, the screams, the smoke, the chaos. And now, after 20 years, she was back in the same house, facing another unknown threat. Rusty's growl grew louder. His eyes never left the shadow. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing pulse. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, to flee, to leave this house she had once called home. But she didn't, she couldn't. She had returned. And whatever was in her living room, whatever had survived all this time, whatever had been waiting, was about to reveal itself. Evelyn's hand tightened on the cane, Rusty's fur bristled. And then the shadow moved closer. Slowly, purposefully. Evelyn's breath caught, and the sound of a voice, barely above a whisper, echoed through the room. "I knew you'd come back." Her heart skipped a beat, her pulse pounded in her ears. Rusty's growl turned into a low, warning snarl. Evelyn's mind raced. 20 years. 20 years of silence, of imprisonment, of uncertainty. And now someone had been here, watching, waiting, and finally they had spoken. Her hand shook on the cane. She swallowed hard. Who was it? And what did they want? The air in the room felt heavier, charged, alive with anticipation. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every whisper of movement pressed against her senses. Evelyn realized, with a mix of dread and determination, that her life had just entered a new chapter, one she could neither predict nor control. Rusty's eyes never left the corner. Evelyn's gaze followed. And in that moment she understood the truth. Whatever had been guarding this house and guarding her dog was no ordinary presence. It was something personal. And it was waiting for her next move. Evelyn sank into the armchair again, Rusty pressing against her side as if he could absorb her fear and steady it. Her hands shook as she ran her fingers through his fur, tracing every scar, every gray hair, every sign that he had lived through 20 long, lonely years without her. The house seemed impossibly still around them, dust motes drifting in the shafts of sunlight like ghosts of the past. And yet the air was electric, thick with anticipation, with secrets, with something that refused to stay buried. Her eyes drifted to Rusty's ear. The tattoo was faint, almost erased by age and time, but she could make out the numbers if she squinted. 4732. She had memorized that sequence in her 20s, though she had never expected to see it again. It was the number the shelter had given him, the number stamped into the soft skin of his ear when she had begged them not to take him away. Her heart lurched. Rusty had survived all these years, alive, waiting, and now the number, the one tangible link to her past, was staring back at her. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest, trying to calm the sudden spike of emotions. Memories surged unbidden. That night, the fire, the chaos, the panic. Her husband's scream, the heat, the smoke so thick it had clawed at her lungs. Rusty had been there. She had seen him vanish into the smoke as the authorities dragged her away. She had spent 2 decades imagining him burned, abandoned, lost. And here he was, alive, with a scarred body and a tattooed ear that screamed survival. Tears pricked her eyes. She knelt to meet him at eye level. "You remembered me, didn't you?" she whispered. Rusty's gaze softened and he pressed his head to her shoulder, limping slightly but steady, like a soldier who had endured a war and lived to tell the tale. Evelyn's mind raced. Someone had been keeping him alive, that much was obvious. Rusty had not survived in the wild alone for 20 years. He had been fed, sheltered, perhaps even trained to wait, to guard. But who? And why? Her thoughts drifted to the note she had found earlier. "He's safe. Don't come back yet. You'll know when the time is right." She whispered the words aloud, almost hoping someone, or something, would answer. But the only response was Rusty's low growl as he shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the far corner of the living room. A sound stirred her, a soft shuffling from the hallway upstairs. Evelyn froze, heart hammering, as Rusty's ears swiveled in unison. Footsteps, someone packing, or merely the creak of an old house settling after 2 decades of neglect. Her mind raced back to the night she had been arrested. She remembered the whispers in the court, the town gossip, the way people had looked at her as if she were already guilty. The fire had destroyed more than a house. It had annihilated her reputation, her family, and any semblance of normal life. And yet, the presence of Rusty in the house now, alive, vigilant, waiting, was proof that some threads of her past had not been severed completely. Someone had fought quietly in the shadows, keeping him alive all these years. Someone who believed in her, perhaps. Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached for her box and pulled out the old photograph of her and her husband, with Rusty as a puppy at their feet. The image had faded edges, corners curling like reluctant memories, but the bond between them was undeniable. Rusty had been more than a pet. He had been her partner, her guardian, her constant companion through the mundane and extraordinary moments of life. And now, after 20 years, he was the bridge back to everything she had lost. A noise upstairs made her start. Rusty's body stiffened, low growl vibrating in his chest. Evelyn clutched his fur, trying to steady herself. Someone is here. The realization made her stomach churn. Whoever had been feeding Rusty, watching over him, had been here recently. Perhaps even now. The house was not empty. Someone had chosen to stay in the shadows, keeping her dog alive, perhaps even manipulating the events that had kept her away. She remembered the shelter worker from 2 decades ago, a young man with nervous hands and tired eyes. He had been kind, sympathetic even when she had pleaded for Rusty's safety. He had promised nothing, but she had held onto hope. Maybe that hope had taken root somewhere, someone keeping Rusty alive in silence. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement at the doorway. Evelyn froze, heart hammering, as Rusty barked once, sharp, protective, unmistakably urgent. A shadow shifted there, flickering in the fading sunlight. Evelyn gripped her cane tightly, prepared to defend herself. "Who's there?" she called, voice trembling but firm. No answer. Rusty growled again, stepping forward. Evelyn followed, cane raised, her breath quickening. The shadow moved closer, a dark shape, human-sized, cautious. The hairs on her neck bristled. Then a voice, soft and hesitant, floated from the corner of the room. "Evelyn!" Her pulse skipped a beat. She recognized the voice, though the years had altered it. It was familiar, faintly trembling, weighted with guilt and fear. Evelyn's mind raced. Could it be someone from the past, someone who had known the truth? The figure emerged slowly into the light. It was a man, older now, shoulders stooped, hair streaked with gray. Recognition struck her like lightning, Mr. Harlan, her old neighbor. Harlan's eyes widened as he took in her presence. You're really here," he whispered. He glanced at Rusty, then back at Evelyn, as though confirming a long-held hope. What happened?" Evelyn asked, voice trembling. "Who's been keeping him alive?" Harlan swallowed hard. I have been," he admitted, voice shaking. "I didn't know if you'd ever come back. I didn't know if it was safe. But I promised him that I would keep him alive until you returned. His voice broke. I didn't know what else to do." Evelyn's chest tightened. Rage, relief, gratitude, and grief collided violently inside her. 20 years of betrayal, of false accusations, of loss, condensed into this moment. She didn't speak. She couldn't. She could only look at Rusty, then at Harlan, and let the weight of decades wash over her. Rusty whined softly, nudging her hand as if sensing her turmoil. Evelyn reached down, holding his head to her chest. "You waited for me," she whispered. "All this time you waited." Harlan nodded, tears brimming. "I had no choice. He would have died without care, and I couldn't let that happen." Evelyn closed her eyes, swallowing hard. The truth was beginning to emerge. The dog, the house, the note, the recent movements, all connected to someone who had silently fought for her, even when she was locked away, even when the world had turned against her. But there were more questions, more truths hidden in shadows. The fire, the false accusations, the decades of absence. Rusty had survived, but the puzzle of her past was far from complete. Evelyn looked at Harlan, her voice firm despite the tremor. "Then tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Every detail I missed, every moment I wasn't there." Harlan nodded, taking a deep breath. "It started the night of the fire." And as he began to speak, Evelyn realized that the story she thought had ended 20 years ago was far from over. The past was returning, piece by piece, and Rusty, the dog who had survived against all odds, was the key to uncovering the truth. Her hands tightened on his fur. Whatever came next, she would face it, together. And somewhere in the corners of the house, shadows shifted, watching, waiting. The past was not done with her. And neither was the justice she deserved. The room seemed to hold its breath as Harlan sank into the armchair across from Evelyn. Rusty sat between them, limping slightly but alert, ears swiveling with every sound. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the worn carpet, illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the still air. It was almost peaceful, too peaceful for the storm of revelations about to unfold. Harlan's hands shook as he clasped them together. He looked like a man carrying the weight of decades, of secrets too heavy for a human heart to bear alone. His eyes met Evelyn, pleading silently for understanding, for forgiveness, for something she wasn't sure she had left to give. I should have done more," he began, voice low and hesitant. "I saw things that night, things I shouldn't have, but I was scared. I was foolish. I thought staying quiet was the safest thing for you, for me, for the town." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Saw what, Harlan? The fire," her voice caught. "What did you see?" Harlan swallowed, sweat beading on his brow. "I saw someone leave the house, right before the flames spread. A man, someone you trusted, someone close. Your husband's business partner, David Lansing. I saw him carrying something, papers, maybe money, I couldn't tell, and then he ran into the shadows. I tried to speak up. I wanted to tell everyone, but I was drunk, terrified, and he threatened me." Evelyn felt her stomach twist. Memories she had suppressed for years surged to the surface. The acrid smoke, the screams, the flashing lights of fire trucks, and the chaos that had engulfed her life. She had been convicted almost instantly. The town had turned against her. Her husband's death, the business gone, her name ruined. It had all been orchestrated by the man who stood to gain from her silence. Rusty whined softly at her feet, nudging her hand. It was as if he understood the gravity of the moment, as if he had known all along. Evelyn leaned down, pressing her forehead to his fur. I trusted him, she whispered. I believed in him. Harlan nodded, eyes filled with guilt. I know, and I let you down. I tried to tell someone, but who would listen? You were already blamed. Everyone wanted a scapegoat, and David, he was clever, ruthless. He made sure the evidence pointed at you, that no one would question it. I was powerless. Evelyn's hands trembled. Rage and grief collided, a fire reigniting inside her chest that she thought had been extinguished by 20 years of imprisonment. Powerless, she spat. You watched while my life was stolen. Harlan flinched but did not look away. I kept Rusty alive. I kept him safe for you. Every day I made sure he ate, that he wasn't alone. I didn't know if you'd ever come back, Evelyn. I didn't know if the law would ever correct what happened. I had to protect him because I knew if he died, a part of you would die too. Evelyn's throat tightened. Her fingers dug into Rusty's fur, grounding herself in the reality of his warmth. 20 years apart. 20 years of silence, pain, and injustice. And now Harlan revealed the truth. The man who had destroyed her life had walked free, hiding behind lies and fear. Tears burned her eyes. She couldn't tell if she was more relieved or angrier. Why now? She whispered. Why didn't you contact me sooner? Harlan shook his head, voice breaking. I tried, letters, messages, even anonymous tips. Nothing reached you. The system, it was rigged. David had friends, influence. And I wasn't strong enough to fight it alone. I thought, maybe if I waited, if I protected Rusty, then someday you'd come back. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to contain the sob that threatened to escape. The reality of it all was almost too much to bear. Her loyal dog had survived because of a neighbor who had risked everything, while the real criminal had remained free, laughing at the world's mistake. Rusty nudged her again, growling softly as if urging her to pay attention. Evelyn followed his gaze to the hallway. He's still here, she murmured. David, he's still in the town, isn't he? Harlan's face darkened. Yes, and he's cautious, careful. He knows you might come back, but he doesn't know you've survived this long. He thinks you're gone forever. Evelyn felt a chill creep over her. The man who had ruined her life was out there, somewhere, watching, waiting, while she had lived 2 decades under a cloud of false accusations. Rusty growled again, more urgently, and Evelyn realized he was reacting to more than memory. He was sensing something, someone, outside the walls of the house. A sudden noise snapped her attention to the window. A shadow flitted across the yard. Rusty barked sharply, running to the window, teeth bared, muscles coiled. Evelyn's pulse spiked. Who's there? She demanded, voice shaking but commanding. The shadow paused. Then it vanished, leaving only the rustle of leaves in its wake. Evelyn's breath came in quick gasps. She knew without a doubt that David Lansing had returned, or had never left. The thought made her stomach churn. Harlan leaned forward, eyes wide. You have to be careful, he warned. He's dangerous. He won't hesitate to destroy anything that threatens him, including you. Evelyn's hands clenched Rusty's fur. I'm not afraid, she said, voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her chest. I've survived 20 years in prison. I can survive him. Harlan exhaled slowly. It's not just him you have to worry about. The town, they still believe what they were told. They still whisper. If he wants to, he can turn them against you again in an instant. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Rage, sorrow, and determination surged through her. She had spent 20 years powerless. But now she had Rusty, she had Harlan, and she had the truth simmering beneath the surface. And she knew, deep down, that it was time to reclaim her life. Rusty nudged her again, pressing against her leg, eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. Evelyn followed his gaze. There, barely visible, a draft made the blinds rattle. A door upstairs creaked, then settled. Someone or something was moving, hiding, observing. Harlan whispered, almost to himself, He's closer than we thought. Evelyn's pulse spiked. She pressed a hand to Rusty's head. Then we find out, she said. We uncover everything. No more secrets, no more hiding. Harlan nodded, swallowing hard. If we're going to do this, you need to be ready for what you'll find." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "I've been ready for 20 years. The room fell silent except for Rusty's low growl, a warning that the past was not done with her. Shadows lingered in the corners. The air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. Evelyn knew, with a sinking certainty, that the next step she took would change everything. Her home, the place she had been ripped from, was alive with secrets, waiting to reveal the truth. And at the center of it all stood Rusty, limping yet vigilant, a guardian who had endured decades of solitude to bring her back to the life she deserved. Evelyn exhaled slowly, gripping her cane. Her eyes met Harlan's. "We start tonight," she said. Rusty growled again, a low, protective sound, as if confirming her words. The shadows in the house seemed to lean closer. The past was coming for her. The truth was about to emerge. And somewhere outside, unseen but very real, someone was watching. Someone who had waited 20 years for her return. Evelyn sat in the living room, Rusty curled at her feet, eyes scanning the corners of the house as if he could sense the ghosts that still lingered. Harlan's confession had opened a door she had long feared to approach. 20 years of injustice, lies, and betrayal pressed down on her. Yet the air now seemed alive with possibility, a chance to uncover the truth and finally reclaim what had been stolen. Harlan cleared his throat. "It was the night of the fire I saw him leave." His voice trembled. "David Lansing, your husband's partner, he wasn't panicking. He was deliberate, calculated. He made sure the fire started, that evidence pointed at you." Evelyn's stomach tightened, bile rising at the memory of that night, the heat, the smoke, the sirens, the accusation that had consumed her life. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was brittle, shaking like a fragile branch in a storm. "Why would he do this?" Harlan looked down at his clasped hands, guilt etched deep into the lines of his face. "Money, power, control. He had everything to gain from your disappearance. The business, the inheritance, your name destroyed. And he had friends in high places. Nobody would question him, not then, not ever. He framed you perfectly." Evelyn pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to absorb the weight of the revelation. The realization that everything she had endured had been orchestrated by someone she once trusted made her feel both furious and hollow. Rusty whimpered softly, nudging her hand as if sensing her pain, reminding her that she was not alone. "David Lansing," she repeated, tasting the words. "He killed my husband and set me up, and everyone believed him." Harlan nodded solemnly. "Yes, he was clever, too clever, and I failed you. I should have spoken up, told someone, gone to the authorities, but I was scared. I thought he'd ruin me too. I thought staying quiet would protect, well, everyone. And I just couldn't." Evelyn's hands balled into fists, nails biting into her palms. Anger surged through her veins like wildfire. 20 years of prison, 20 years of loneliness, betrayal, and lost time. And now the truth revealed itself in the form of her old neighbor's trembling confession. Do you know what happened to Rusty that night?" she asked, voice breaking. "After the fire." Harlan's eyes glistened with tears. "I do. I found him. He was hiding under the porch, burned and scared. I couldn't let him be taken by animal control. I couldn't, so I brought him here. Fed him, cared for him, kept him alive until you returned." Evelyn exhaled, tears streaming down her face. Rusty nudged her again, leaning into her, almost smiling with his canine understanding. He had survived the inferno, survived neglect, survived 20 years alone because someone had risked everything to protect him. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. Harlan swallowed, voice barely a whisper. "Evelyn, he's still out there. Lansing. He knows you might come back. And now, with Rusty here, with you here, he'll feel threatened. He's dangerous. He won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in his way." Evelyn's hands trembled on the cane. Rage, grief, and determination collided violently. "Then we stop him," she said, voice steady despite the storm inside. "No more hiding, no more fear. We expose him. Every last lie, every single piece of evidence. Harlan hesitated. It won't be easy. He's smart. He knows the law, the people in this town. He can manipulate the system even now, and if he suspects, we're onto him. Evelyn's gaze hardened. I've survived 20 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I can survive David Lansing. The two of them sat in tense silence, Rusty resting his head on Evelyn's lap, aware of the growing tension in the room. Outside, the wind rustled through the old oak tree in the front yard, leaves scratching against the siding like whispers from the past. Evelyn's mind turned to the night of the fire again. She remembered the flames, the panic, the smoke filling her lungs. But now she saw it clearly, the way Lansing had moved with precision, the way he had ensured her arrest, the way he had left no witnesses who could speak against him. And the realization struck her like a thunderbolt. For 20 years he had walked free, preying on the town's memory of that night while she had been imprisoned for his crimes. Her hands gripped Rusty tighter. "We need evidence," she said, determination hardening her voice. "Harlan, you saw him that night. That's a start. But we need more proof, witnesses, anything that can finally expose him." Harlan nodded, swallowing hard. "There's something else, something I didn't tell anyone, something I should have." Evelyn's pulse spiked. "What?" Harlan leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "The fire, it wasn't just arson. Someone helped him cover it up. Someone close, someone you trusted." Evelyn's mind raced. The pieces she had struggled to fit together for 20 years suddenly began to shift into place. Every betrayal, every whispered accusation, every unjust verdict, it had been orchestrated meticulously by people she had trusted most. Rusty growled softly, low and warning, as if confirming the danger that lingered beyond the walls of the house. Evelyn followed his gaze toward the window. Shadows flickered in the yard. Leaves rustled. Something or someone was there, watching, waiting. Harlan whispered, "He's close, and he knows you're back." Evelyn swallowed hard, determination blazing in her eyes. "Then it's time," she said. "Time to uncover everything. Time to confront the truth. No more hiding. No more waiting." The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with tension, as if the house itself sensed the coming confrontation. Rusty's ears twitched, his body coiled with readiness. Evelyn stood, cane in hand, eyes scanning the room, heart pounding. The past had returned. The lies, the betrayal, the injustice, all of it converged in this moment. Harlan exhaled slowly, voice trembling. "Be careful. He's dangerous, Evelyn. He won't hesitate to destroy anything or anyone in his way." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I survived prison, Harlan. I survived 20 years of lies and isolation. I will survive him." A sudden noise from upstairs made them both freeze, a floorboard creaking, deliberate, careful. Rusty's growl deepened, his body low and tense. Evelyn's pulse quickened. The past was no longer silent. It was here. And somewhere in the shadows of her old home, David Lansing, the man who had destroyed her life, was waiting. Evelyn took a deep breath, gripping Rusty's fur. "Let's end this," she whispered. The shadows shifted, the house held its breath, and the storm of truth began to descend. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Rusty lay beside her on the threadbare rug, his scarred body radiating quiet vigilance, and she stared at the ceiling, replaying Harlan's confession over and over. Every detail of the fire, every shadow of deceit, every lie that had kept her imprisoned for 2 decades was a puzzle piece she now had the chance to assemble. But the pieces were jagged, dangerous, and incomplete. Morning light spilled into the room, dust motes dancing like ghosts across the furniture. Evelyn rose, stretching aching limbs that hadn't been fully free in 20 years. Her reflection in the mirror by the hallway startled her, aged, lined, but with eyes that still burned with fire. Eyes that would not be ignored, would not be silenced again. Rusty nudged her hand, limping slightly, his presence grounding her. Together they were ready. Harlan appeared in the doorway, hands shaking but determined. "I called someone," he said quietly. "Legal aid. They'll reopen your case, but we have to move carefully. Lansing still has influence. He won't stay silent and he won't be easy to confront. Evelyn nodded, swallowing hard. I don't care how hard it is. I want everything, my name cleared, the truth out there, no more lies. Harlan hesitated, then stepped aside. Evelyn felt a flicker of fear, one she hadn't felt in years, not for herself, not for Rusty, but for the storm she was about to unleash. She knew that exposing Lansing meant risking more than just her comfort. It meant reopening old wounds, confronting a town that had turned against her, and shining a light on a darkness that had long remained hidden. They began by gathering evidence. Harlan handed over what he had collected over the years, documents, receipts, photographs, even his own handwritten notes detailing the night of the fire. Evelyn scanned each page, mind racing. This was proof. Small, fragile proof, but enough to start unraveling the narrative Lansing had constructed. Rusty sat alert by the window, ears pricked, as if sensing the tension in the room. Evelyn stroked his head. "We're doing this for you too, Rusty," she whispered. "For everything you survived, for all the years we were apart." Days passed in a blur of interviews, phone calls, and document gathering. Legal aid specialists listened, took notes, and began piecing together the inconsistencies in her case. Witnesses who had been silenced by fear or manipulation were contacted, hesitant at first, then emboldened by the tenacity of a woman who had survived 20 years behind bars. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, an old employee of Lansing, who had witnessed suspicious activity on the night of the fire. The man had kept quiet for decades out of fear for his own safety. But when Evelyn and Harlan arrived, bringing Rusty along for silent, steadfast support, he finally spoke. His words were careful, measured, but damning. "I saw him set the fire. I saw him leave the house, calm, collected, carrying papers that weren't his. I never wanted to get involved, but he's not the man you were made out to be. You didn't do this." Evelyn's heart raced. Every word felt like a key turning in the lock of her long-closed life. 20 years of fear and false guilt began to crack. Rusty barked softly, as if acknowledging the truth, pressing against her leg. Then came the court date. She walked into the courtroom with Harlan at her side, Rusty quietly following on a leash. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and townspeople stared, some in disbelief, some in lingering suspicion. But Evelyn held her head high. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, but it also carried the energy of something raw and transformative, justice finally awakening. Her attorney presented the evidence systematically. Harlan's notes, the witness testimonies, the receipts proving Rusty's care and the odd movements in her house, and inconsistencies in Lansing's original statements. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the narrative that had imprisoned her, revealing a tapestry of deceit that had ensnared her for 2 decades. Lansing sat at the defense table, composed on the outside but visibly tense beneath the surface. He caught Evelyn's eye once, a flicker of recognition passing across his face, perhaps realizing that his careful construction of lies was finally unraveling. But Evelyn did not flinch. She had waited 20 years for this moment. She would not be intimidated. The most damning testimony came from Harlan, who recounted in detail what he had witnessed the night of the fire and the years he had spent keeping Rusty alive. He spoke of fear, loyalty, and regret, every word punctuated by the dog's presence at his feet, a living reminder of survival, of patience, and of truth waiting for the right moment. Rusty whined softly, and Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. The courtroom seemed to lean in, sensing the tension, the weight of decades compressed into these moments. Every eye was on her, every ear tuned to the story unfolding. Then a breakthrough. The judge called for a recess, whispering to the attorneys about new evidence just submitted, emails and documents showing Lansing's financial manipulations, communications proving he had orchestrated the fire and framed Evelyn. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten, not with fear, but with anticipation. When the proceedings resumed, Lansing's demeanor faltered. Witnesses corroborated Harlan's testimony. Rusty's presence became a symbol of the unwavering truth, and the lawyer's closing argument painted a picture of betrayal, manipulation, and a crime hidden in plain sight for 20 long years. The verdict was a slow, deliberate exhale. "Evelyn Carter," the judge intoned, "this court finds you were wrongfully convicted. Your name is hereby cleared." The words struck Evelyn with the force of a hurricane. Tears streamed down her face as she fell to her knees, Rusty licking her hands as if he understood every ounce of her relief, every heartbeat of her vindication. Harlan clasped her shoulders, tears in his eyes as the courtroom erupted around them, some in applause, some in stunned silence. But for Evelyn, there was only Rusty, the living, breathing proof that loyalty, survival, and truth could outlast decades of injustice. She hugged the dog tightly, her sobs shaking her frame. "We did it," she whispered. "We finally did it." Outside, cameras flashed, reporters jostled, and the town watched as a woman wronged for 20 years stepped into the sunlight, reclaimed her life, and faced the world with a courage that refused to be broken. But even in victory, Evelyn felt the weight of the years she had lost. 20 years could not be returned, and no court could restore the moments stolen from her. Rusty nudged her hand again, and she realized that while justice had been served, life's healing would be gradual, measured, and intertwined with the dog who had survived, waited, and guided her back. That evening, Evelyn returned to her home. Rusty limped beside her, tail wagging lightly, still wary but content. The house no longer felt like a tomb of her past. It felt like a sanctuary of survival. Every room whispered memories, pain, and triumph. And for the first time in 2 decades, she allowed herself to feel whole. Harlan lingered at the doorway watching her, his face etched with relief and lingering guilt. "It's over," he said softly. Evelyn turned, hands on Rusty's fur, and nodded. "No," she said, voice steady. "It's just beginning." Somewhere in the shadows the town still whispered, but Evelyn no longer feared them. She had Rusty, she had truth, and she had herself back. The storm had passed, and now, finally, she could rebuild. But even as she stood there, feeling the weight of justice settling around her, a subtle tension lingered. In the quiet corners of the house, in the shadows cast by the oak tree outside, there was still a presence watching, still a question unanswered. How many others had been left to suffer in silence, waiting for the day someone would finally come home? Evelyn pressed her hand to Rusty's head. "We'll face whatever comes," she whispered, "together." Rusty barked softly, almost in agreement, as if sealing a pact forged in loyalty, survival, and truth. The house exhaled with them, a sanctuary reclaimed, a past confronted, and a future waiting to be written. And somewhere in the distance, shadows shifted, reminding her that even in victory, life's mysteries and dangers never truly disappear. The morning sun poured through the blinds of 214 Maple Street, bathing the living room in a warm, golden glow. Dust motes danced lazily in the light, and the house seemed almost alive again, stretching after years of neglect and abandonment. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, Rusty at her side, limping slightly but alert, his head tilted as if he understood the significance of the moment. It had been weeks since the court vindicated her. Newspapers had written her story, cameras had followed her steps, and whispers in the town had shifted from suspicion to awe. Evelyn had been given her life back on paper, but reclaiming it fully was another matter. 2 decades couldn't simply be erased. Memories of the prison walls, the injustice, and the nights spent wondering if she would ever feel free again were woven into the fibers of her being. Yet as she looked around the house, every scarred floorboard and faded photograph told a different story, a story of survival, of patience, of loyalty. Rusty's presence was the living proof that even in the darkest times, hope had persisted. Evelyn ran her fingers along the arm of the sofa, worn and threadbare, and paused at the edge of the fireplace. The wedding photo of her and her husband still hung crookedly above it, slightly askew but intact. She remembered the night of the fire, the panic, the smoke, the screams. The memory was raw, painful, but now it was also tempered with truth. She had survived. Rusty had survived. And the man who had orchestrated her downfall had been exposed. Harlan entered quietly, holding a stack of papers. "The legal team wants to know your next steps," he said gently. "Financial restitution, civil suits, clearing your name in the town's records completely." Evelyn nodded. She had already made up her mind. Money, reputation, or validation from a society that had failed her, it was all secondary. What mattered was reclaiming her life on her own terms. "I'll deal with that later," she said softly. "Right now we rebuild." Harlan smiled faintly, though worry lingered in his eyes. He had been part of the silent struggle for 20 years, a witness and protector. He had seen the toll of time on Evelyn, and now he watched as she stepped fully into her life again. Rusty nudged her hand and Evelyn bent down, pressing her forehead to his fur. "We have a lot to fix," she whispered, "a lot to live for." The first step was the garden. The backyard, overgrown and wild, had become a tangle of weeds and neglected plants. Evelyn found herself kneeling in the soil, Rusty's head resting against her knee as she cleared debris and planted seeds. The act was cathartic, grounding her in the tangible reality of growth and renewal. Life, she realized, could be gentle, patient, and stubbornly persistent, just like Rusty had been. Days turned into weeks. Evelyn repaired the house slowly, room by room. She scrubbed walls, repainted furniture, and replaced broken panes of glass. Each task was small yet monumental, a reclamation of space, of time, and of dignity. Rusty accompanied her everywhere, his limping gait a reminder of endurance, his eyes sharp and vigilant, guarding both her and the fragile peace of the home. The townspeople began to notice. Some approached with curiosity, others with lingering suspicion, but Evelyn met each encounter with quiet strength. She spoke of the past only when necessary, letting her calm presence and unwavering resolve speak louder than words. And gradually, the town began to see her not as a convict, but as a woman who had endured, survived, and emerged with dignity intact. Yet even in moments of peace, Evelyn felt the lingering pulse of danger, the shadow of Lansing. He had been exposed, yes, but power and influence rarely vanish overnight. There were still whispers of his friends in high places, still remnants of fear in the town. Evelyn knew that while she had reclaimed her life, vigilance was necessary. Rusty sensed it too. Even during calm afternoons, his ears would twitch, his head would tilt, and he would scan the edges of the property as if warning of invisible intruders. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the maple tree, casting long shadows across the yard, Evelyn sat on the porch with Rusty at her feet. The breeze was warm, carrying the scent of soil, leaves, and the faint remnants of past fires. She breathed deeply, savoring the simplicity of the moment, the quiet companionship of her dog, the soft rustle of the trees, and the fact that she was finally home. Harlan joined her quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one and they sat in companionable silence, watching the world awaken in the fading light. "You've done well," he said softly. "After everything, you've survived and thrived." Evelyn smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and the hard-won wisdom of 20 years behind bars. "We've done well," she corrected. "Rusty and I." Rusty barked softly, a sound of affirmation, before resting his head against her knee. Evelyn stroked his fur, feeling the rise and fall of his chest beneath her hand. He had been her anchor, her silent guardian, and now, her steadfast companion in the life she was determined to rebuild. The night fell slowly, stars emerging one by one, faint and unwavering in the dark sky. Evelyn stood and walked to the edge of the porch, cane in hand, Rusty limping beside her. She looked out over the town below, lights flickering in the distance. A sense of closure mingled with anticipation. The past had been confronted. Lansing's lies had been exposed. Her name had been cleared. But Evelyn knew the future was still unwritten. There would be challenges, lingering whispers, and perhaps even threats. Yet for the first time in 20 years, she felt ready to meet them, not as a prisoner, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Rusty nudged her hand, breaking her reverie. She bent down, pressing her forehead against his. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "we face it together." A sudden movement in the yard made her glance up. Shadows flickered under the old oak tree. Rusty's ears twitched, his body coiling slightly, ready to defend, ready to protect. Evelyn's pulse quickened, not with fear but with awareness. Life was never truly free of challenges, but she had learned to endure, to fight, and to rise above them. She straightened, cane in hand, Rusty at her side, and felt a surge of determination. The house, the dog, the reclaimed life, they were all symbols of what remained after everything had been lost. What was left was precious, fragile, and hers to protect. And in that quiet moment, with the stars above and Rusty leaning against her, Evelyn Carter understood the truth she had been denied for 20 long years. Life could take everything from you. It could imprison you. It could make you question your own worth. But the threads that remain, the loyalty, the love, the courage, could rebuild worlds. She inhaled deeply, letting the cool night air fill her lungs. The shadows might linger. The past might whisper. The town might still murmur its secrets, but Evelyn, with Rusty by her side, was no longer afraid. She was whole, she was free, and she was ready. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the safety of the porch in the old house, a figure watched. Eyes hidden, silent, calculating. But for the first time, Evelyn didn't flinch. She was no longer prey. She was alive, vigilant, and armed with truth. Rusty barked softly, and Evelyn smiled. Together they faced the world. And in the stillness of the night, amidst shadows and whispers, one thing was certain. The story was no longer about what had been taken. It was about what was left. The house, the dog, the woman who had endured, their bond was unbreakable. And nothing, not fire, not lies, not time, could ever take that away again.